Howdy, Sending Sheriff here. I'm gonna try to make the second half. That doesn't. I made a video recently where I was talking about my viewpoint or opinion on boots. So now I'm trying to answer the second question or second part of the original question I was asked and talk about shirts. As a kind of praise shout out, I now have 2 people in my Patreon as subscribers to that. I will add pictures here. So thank you to those 2 for joining my Patreon. Please, everyone else, take the time to go check out the Patreon link in the description. All these videos I do, whatever I spend, whatever I do, all that is out of my pocket, my money that I'm spending. So these videos are not horrifically cheap, especially when I show you guys a new gun. All the guns that I bought with my money. So please go check out the Patreon, and also please go check out the GoFundMe page for my sister and dad. And thank you very much to my 2 Patreon peoples. So many people in the YouTube viewing whatever community probably know already most of what I'm going to talk about or say. But for those of you that don't know and are just interested, I need to explain a little bit about history. So way back in the day when cowboys, which really were called ranchers, when they were the most common type of work, they had not a lot of money. So things that the cowboy would use had to be relatively generic in style and in price. To give you an example, almost nobody in that time period used 22 LR or Magnum, WMR, whatever you want to call it, because the most common caliber that they used was 45 Long Colt, or for those of you that don't know, Long Colt. That was the most common caliber And please excuse the tiny little bit of quivering in the screen. The bed apparently picks up vibrations in the floor really well. Anyway, so things back then were very specific in some ways and not specific in other ways. So the specific in some ways meaning things were made the exact same way every time, and everyone had to try to find ways to make it work for them. For example, I would not have been able to use a gun back then because I can't work with a .380, much less trying to shoot a .45. So I would be completely so that is made to be exact. Everyone had to try to find ways to make the common thing match them or match the common thing. But that idea applied to a lot. For example, if you were a my apologies before I even say this, because I know somebody who's watching this video is probably going to become mad. But I'm not saying this about anyone specifically. As an example, if you were a big fat guy, the normal sized pants probably wouldn't fit you. They were made for these slightly bigger sized people, but not just flat out big fat people. So if you were maybe waist size 38 through 42, you probably would be fine. But if you're any size above, good luck. So the problem is, like, for example, me, I'm a size roughly 32 through 34. I could fit a size 30 depending on if I have an in the waistband gun like I do now. That I would have to remove if I wanted to wear size 30. So I tend to use size 32. But most people in the West, I'm guessing they were probably more like 34 through 36, I'm guessing. Maybe 40s in there somewhere, 38. You get the idea. But the reason why that was a little awkward is because everything had to be made the most simple way you could. So, like, that's one of the reasons why pants are called a pair of pants. Because the way they made them was they got two tubes of cloth, normally denim, sometimes burlap, depending on how much money you could spend. I think it was mostly denim, but they had two tubes. The top they would put together, cut a little U shape, and obviously that's where your the place where your legs meet, that's what the U was for. They almost never had pockets because that would just be a little bit more work, too much cost going into it, because you had to pay for labor. So they never had pockets. And the way that you would keep your pants up was suspenders with buttons that were sewn approximately here. So that's how they made one size fits all. Now, how does that apply to shirts? Well, the same idea. They found ways to make shirts super simple, and therefore they were kind of cheap. I think most of the time they were made out of burlap, maybe cotton, something like that. If you were really fancy, you had one made out of linen. I don't know how to spell that word. Linen. Sometimes lace, but that was mostly for women. So you could have a little bit more fancy cloth in your shirt, but most people it was just cotton or burlap. And that's because to make a shirt, they would really just use a big bag. You have the bag here, what normally is the bottom, and I'm going to try to add a picture of what I'm talking about over here. So you have this end where the opening is, and then you have the closed end over here. So how they would make that become a shirt is they would use more cloth tubes, and they would add it into a hole they would cut in the sides. So this curve, here would not be in a shirt from back then. It would just be straight. So this bag would change and become this. That's how they made a shirt. Now, you maybe are already asking yourself, well, why does it have the buttons going like here? Well, that's because they needed a way to make sure that your head would fit through the opening. They would have to cut a little circle at the top, what normally was the bottom. And yes, I forgot to tell you that I was going to flip the picture over. But anywho, so they would cut a hole in the top. That's where your head would go through. So cowboy shirts normally did not have this, the collar. That was something fancy people added to their clothing. Bless you. So these buttons were designed specifically to close the hole again. Make it so that things like... Bless you. More? More? I can't see your... Anyway. What was I saying? Oh! It was to try to prevent leaves, dust, tiny animals, which didn't normally work, but hopefully you didn't have animals crawling across your body anyway. So they were to try to restrict things getting into the shirt. Like if I had to pull my shirts on like that, and this was open, you would probably have a small problem with random things falling down here because it's a big hole. So that was to close it. Now, how did cowboys keep all this together? Well, the first obvious way is that the shirt was kept in place using the suspenders that would pull it against them in the front and pull it against them in the back. Then down here at the bottom, it would be tucked into the pants, which would hold it together. So they never really needed a belt. The belt was specifically to hold things like a knife. If you had a gun, you would keep it there. But that's one of the most common things that people sometimes get wrong. Yes, there was 2 different types of gun belts. You had that's called a buscadero. That was the most common, or not common, the most normal style that cowboys would use, because that's what most people would have ready, because their pants didn't have belt loops. So that was a belt design for the poor people. Now, I have suspenders. I don't have to use a belt. I have a belt because I try to keep things in my waist. For example, a gun. It's a little bit hard to keep the gun where it's supposed to be without a belt holding it. So that's why I have a belt. But I don't have to have that belt. I can just take that off and be fine, because my pants stay up with this, and if I need to pull it against myself a little bit more, I have my gun belt. So that's how the actual original shirt worked. Then they started with this. That's when they were able to design more. You didn't have to pay as much for labor. So they could add a complete seam straight down the middle. and add buttons. That is where or when different sizing started. And that's the real reason why shirts became more expensive, because you had to try to find your size. When everyone wore the exact same size and just made it fit them better with their other clothing, it was more easy. They knew exactly how much the shirt was going to cost because they all cost the same. But then you have people like me that have long, spindly arms. I have to have extra long sleeves. I would not have worked well in cowboy times because I would have had like this, and it would have annoyed the snot out of me with my wrist being showing like that. So hopefully all this made sense. Hopefully I didn't ramble a lot, which I'm guessing I did. Please let me know in the comments. I'm trying to continue to add videos to YouTube on Monday. I don't know which other day I want to do it, so please let me know what day you would prefer, Monday and what. So I will see you in the next video, and happy trails.